Hello, Mike O'Vannon, and welcome to Under Towers Podcast. My name is Steven.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Sam.
And boy, do we have an exciting episode for you tonight.
Mm-hmm.
We are joined by the one and only James Wynn from the Rereading Wolfe podcast. And we are, as you might be able to see, going to be talking with him about Gene Wolfe's Wizard Knight, one of our absolute favorite books. And can't wait for you guys to hear this discussion. Tonight we will be discussing Knight, the first book in this duology. He's going to be joining us again shortly to discuss Wizard. One thing, we had a nice long conversation with James, so we're going to cut this beginning portion short. But one thing to make absolutely clear before we go forward, this is going to be a spoiler-heavy discussion. So please know that going forward. It's kind of awkward to say, hey, don't listen to our episode, but like if you're reading Wizard Knight, if you're looking forward to reading Wizard Knight, this is not like a pump you up about reading Wizard Knight episode. This is a pretty in-depth discussion about Knight. So there's going to be spoilers throughout.
And while the focus of the discussion is the Knight, we cover things that come up in the Wizard Knight. So if you've read the first one, you might even want to read the second beforehand too.
Yeah. So pause, go read Wizard Knight. Read Wizard Knight anyways if you haven't. And we'll see you at the discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. All right. Welcome back to Under Towers. And we have a very special guest tonight. Super excited to have with us Mr. James Wynn from the Rereading Wolfe podcast. And as you might guess, we're going to be talking about Wizard Knight. So welcome, James. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
So like I said, you're one of the hosts of the Rereading Wolfe podcast. Could you kind of give us a little bit of a rundown on what is your relationship with Gene Wolfe? How did it start for you? When did it start?
Oh, yeah. Well, I got into Gene Wolfe probably the normal way. Someone gave me the 4 paperback copies of the Book of the New Sun and said that a friend had given them to him, and he thought that they were interesting, and he wondered what I would think of them. And he said the friend who'd given the books said that he'd made 3 attempts at them and just kind of got distracted during the reading of the first volume and decided, well, I'm just going to push through. And this is an incredibly normal process as well, by the way.
Absolutely.
So I started by just pushing through. Those were, I set my expectations for that. But I'm someone who has to look up every word if I'm not 100% positive of the exact meaning of it. Damn. And so this was when you couldn't just Google a word.
Right.
Get lots of
encyclopedia
definitions.
time, right?
Yeah. So I'd write them down as I came upon them. And then at the end of each chapter, I'd go around and look them up. And then I'd reread the portions to ensure that I understood the meaning and context. It took a long time for me to get through.
Do you remember, was there a word that was hardest to figure out? Do you have any memory? Because obviously there's a lot of archaic words in Book of the New Sun.
Well, there are some words that you just don't find in any old dictionary.
Sure.
And some words I'm not sure he didn't misspell. Those were tough. And there was one word going through in the podcast, Erentari, and I couldn't find Erentari. And then I discovered that there is a term called Ferentari, and it's for a Roman legion who are basically light infantry who would fling lances or spears or stones or whatever. And they and it turns out that term is in a book of Roman and medieval military terms that Michael Andre Derisi, who wrote Lexicon Earthus,
right,
said that he'd been using.
Wow.
So that seems okay. Looks like he misspelled that word. But but the fact is, if so, then he misspelled it also in The Castle of the Otter again. So he had incorporated that misspelling.
It's now the new word.
Yeah, those are not all the words. That some words are, they're all real, but some words you don't know where he got them. There's a word that Hathor uses, escaping me now.
You're good.
I can't find it anywhere. I can't find it in the Oxford English Dictionary. But
Wow.
apparently, there is a very, very similar word in Mrs. Burns' dictionary,
Interesting.
which is a reference that Wolfe was using.
Yeah.
So I don't know where she got it. It seems to be very similar to some other types of cognates. So it basically means like my beautiful one. But so those are tough. There are some words that seem to be put together, but from other Greek terms that he's kind of
Cobbled
deriving
together.
from
Yeah.
those. Yeah, he's not making them up, but he's not exactly picking them up off the shelf whole in normal situations. The words, lots of words that he didn't. There's a term for a type of stone. It's kind of translucent, and when Severian is in the necropolis and he's wandering around reading all these gravestones, he's Chalcedon, maybe it, but it gives the idea that this is not a graveyard like you'd expect with a bunch of granite stones. This looks more like something you'd see on the cover of a 50s sci-fi novel or something. So yeah, I mean,
joys of Wolfe, isn't it?
What's that?
That's one of the joys of reading Wolfe is that
that is true. I mean, that's why he's not adapted, because he did something in really all of his books that is you can only do in a book.
Yeah.
You can't do it in any other medium. And it's really interesting. Just at the end of where everybody is reading books, you had this guy come out and just kind of do something very special with the novel that can only be done in a novel, can't be translated into the other new mediums that were becoming so popular.
Yeah. No, we talked about that a lot, but both with Book of the New Sun and with Wizard Night of Light, because just a little fun game we like to play with ourselves in the our book club is casting. If we were to make a movie or a show, like who would we cast in these different roles? And we could pick plenty of great actors and things, but the stuff that we always came back to with both of these series was like, how does this even work though? Like, you can come up with the perfect guy to play Severian or Abel, and what does that even mean? Like, how does the magic that is on these pages ever get transferred?
Right. It would look like you could do it particularly for the Book of the New Sun. You could do it, but it would just look like a normal sword and sorcery.
Yeah.
Something like that. You wouldn't really get that special flavor that you're getting from these. Some of them, like the Book of the Long Sun, I could very much see that being translated into a Game of Thrones style HBO series.
Yeah.
And this one, I don't know. There's a lot of idiosyncrasies to this particular novel, The Wizard Knight. I don't know whether you could adapt it. Maybe.
So with you being a Wolfe fan for a long time, did you read Wizard Knight soon after it came out, or did you?
As it was coming out. Yeah, I bought it, and so that would be what, 2004?
Yeah,
2002, 2004.
Yeah.
And that's something that's worth noting about this book. For a normal writer, this is their magnum opus. This big fat volume, two separate fat volumes, a duology, and this is what Wolfe wrote in his 70s. And a lot of people. It's interesting that everyone agrees that the Book of the New Sun is his magnum opus, but he probably has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other books that are regularly identified as readers' favorite book by him.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Well, I know Wizard. I loved Book of the New Sun, and I cannot wait to read it again. But
that's the best way. You haven't read it.
Exactly. Yeah. I haven't actually read it. I have to reread it first. But there was something about Wizard Knight, and Daniel called this out when we were finishing up our first reading of Book of the New Sun. He said, "Listen, Wolfe wrote this other series, Wizard Knight, and you have to read it, Stephen. And he was completely right. It touched me deeply throughout this whole thing. What was your initial reaction when you read them as they were coming out? What was your initial reaction?
Confusion.
Sure. Yeah.
But the normal one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, a Wolfe novel, the first read of a Wolfe novel is the most painful. I feel very lost. I feel uncomfortable. I feel paranoid. I feel like there's a plot that's peering at me from just beyond my peripheral. And it's really only later readings that are fun.
Yeah.
And the first one is I got to get through this, and which is fine. But it's so what was my reaction coming out as I was reading it? Well, I remember I was on the Earth list. Back in the day, that was how Wolfe readers talked to each other. And we would, as it was coming out, the reaction was first it was kind of marketed when it was coming out as a young adult novel. And my first reaction was, this is no young adult novel. First of all, this is not going to end up in any middle school library.
No.
And so that there was that. And I remember that Roy C. Lackey, who was an old guard Earthlister, he had a super detailed memory of all the books that he was discussing. And his first reaction was, well, I hope Wolfe's house is paid for because he's not going to get rich on this one. So it's not your typical sword and sorcery novel. It's not even that. It is fantasy, but it's kind of a Arthurian fantasy.
Yes. Yeah.
But even more, but it's even more detailed than that because it's got a whole structure for the world.
Yeah.
And I only know of two people who have an end-to-end understanding of what's happening. That is to say, the super plot that is happening above all other plots, and which are Mark Aramini, who has a write-up that has not been published, and Michael Andre Gerisi, who wrote the Lexicon Earthus, but also wrote the Wizard Knight Companion.
Yeah. We have that right here.
I consider to be really, really useful for this book because
it's absolutely phenomenal.
Right, there's so many characters, and there's so many, and there's so many twin characters that are obviously in some sense the same person. So it's very hard to keep track of them, and time progresses in a weird way. So he's got all of these timelines, and it's very, very, very helpful. I really recommend anyone who enjoys it to run right out and get that book for their second read.
Agreed. It has the Undertower's stamp of approval.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal companion.
So Mark's idea of this novel is that that Abel is a fetus that's never been born, that he was absorbed by his twin. And there are a lot to recommend that theory. Well, from the very beginning, the first person he meets in the novel is Parka, and Parka is a triad goddess of childbirth, primarily. And there's just so many. Oh yeah, I see what he's going. I see what he's saying. It's incredible to me that he made that cognitive leap. I once asked him, "Did you were you given hints about this from Wolfe or something?" And he never answered that. So I don't know exactly how he made the cognitive leap, but it carries. It's very believable. On the other hand, I'm reading it, and many times I'm thinking, I don't know. It feels like maybe Abel's the one who was born, and it's Bold Bertold, Ben, who wasn't born. And then so there's that theory. And then there's Michael Andre Gerisi's theory, which is this is a changeling story, and this is incredibly appealing to me on a lot of levels. But throughout the story, you have these dreams of like a ambulance taking off, maybe they found him out there in the fields, or, of him in the hospital, or him grown up and doing heroic things. And so you say, oh, okay, so Michael's theory is Abel has, and this character who's the narrator have been swapped. So it starts out, this character is a teenage boy in America, and now he's in this world, and so they've stolen him and they've replaced him with someone else. That is very, very appealing to me as well.
Well, and there's a Wolfe interview, I believe, where he speaks to the writing of Wizard Knight and says that he seems to speak to that being the case of it being the kind of that classic fairy swapping the kids tale.
I have also had people tell me that they have spoken to him about the twin theory, and
interesting,
he confirms that too. So
fascinating.
Yeah, but both of these theories, they do not touch at all. And so I don't know what to do with it. I don't claim to know have any insight into what the hyper narrative of the story is.
So in the twin story, how does America come into it then? Do you know how that works in that theory?
I've read, and I can't get to see that Mark is, and Mark will chime in as soon as this comes out.
Please do.
I've got that totally explained. I've always wanted to just sit down with him on Mike and just discuss his theory. Because he tells it, he has a way of telling it in a very particular way that it's not the way I would expect to have an explanation fed to me. So I definitely want it to break down. So I'm going to say that it is easy to get Mark Aramini to give you his write-up, and you should read it because there's a lot of reliable stuff in there.
Okay. Well, Mark, we're talking to you right now, Mark. Share us your write-up.
Please send us your write-up.
Yes. Mark has a real gift for picking up on important points that a lot of readers at the time when he's doing it simply miss and kind of whiffs by them. So I always have a problem with Mark theory because I just feel like I think you're right about this and this and this. I'm not sure you're there. And I don't feel at ease with them. And if anyone who's listened to our discussion of the play in the Book of the New Sun knows that how I can be very I see your point, and yet I don't think you're right. So,
well, I've listened to those episodes, and it is interesting. Mark is a Wolfe thinker, is very he has a very focused, clear definition of what he thinks is going on, and he always articulates it really well. And whenever I'm listening to him, I agree with what he says until I think about it a little later. But in the moment, I'm like, he's 100% right. And then later, sorry, Mark, if you're listening. Then later, I'm like, I don't know. I did watch it. But then you when you theorize, it's always very expansive, which I always love. It's always like, whoa, and it's always like I have no idea if what you're saying is right or what Wolfe intended at all. But it's all like that's actually plausible, and I just love that you can read Wolfe, and it's like you can have your whole feeling changed on the novel, just in little moments, and you're like, wait, I thought this was one thing, this is maybe this whole other thing. And I just, there's no other writer that gives me that feeling.
That's true.
But so we've kind of,
there will never be a consensus about a Wolfe novel,
which is awesome. It's so awesome.
It's pretty great. So we've kind of touched on the beginning of it being a changeling story or the absorbed twin, which I've heard Mark talk about that a little bit, but I don't feel like I really comprehend it. Although I remember he does talk, because in the beginning in the cave, Parker grows small and then big, and then it fills full of doves, which he was saying is something like it's an allusion to a womb filling full of semen or something, which does sort of make sense on a figurative level. But then again, I remember hearing Mark talk about it. Beyond that, so I'm just.
Well, let's talk about that.
Move on.
Let's get
what do you think of when you say a flock of doves?
Well, to me, that whole if we want to get started here into the story, that whole scene with Parka and with the doves in the cave and everything struck me more as kind of the very first indications of the Christian symbolism.
Sure.
Firstly, Parka, the first thing that I thought of when meeting Parka was, of course, the fates, the three fates, or the
Exactly.
Norns. I just finished rereading for the nth time the Chronicles of Prydain with my kids for the first time, and there's Ordu, Orwin, and Orgoch in that story. But one thing with Parka is, she's obviously kind of filling this fate role with the weaving and cutting threads and everything. But there's only one of her, which struck me as kind of a 3-in-1 idea.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And then the doves, if I'm remembering correctly, they're flying out of the cave too, as Abel is leaving Parka's cave and going out onto the sand, which very much felt like Jesus, the Christ figure, exiting the tomb, being born again. I also read, I think, on the blog that you sent me, talk about the idea that the manger and Jesus' birthplace was potentially in a cave and not in an actual literal barn.
Yeah.
And so there we're having the birth of this kind of semi-Christ-like
Abel's definitely
figure.
Yeah, Abel's definitely a Christ-like figure on some level.
For Mythgarther. That was kind of where I went with it. I'd read the kind of inseminating the womb thing, and I could see that it's not where my mind went originally.
Well, there is a lot of I think this was recognized very early, that Abel's relationship with Disiri is very much along the lines of Christ and the church, in that he desperately loves Disiri, but the angel, the archangel Michael shows up at some point in this story, and he explains to him, and he has Valfather, who is like the god of the greatest god of the humans in Mythgarther, and he summons him and has him bow before his feet, and he tells him, in order to rise, you're going to have to learn to have Disiri bow before you in just this way. This has to be your relationship with Disiri. So there's a lot of Christian concepts going on here, because it's his ultimate relationship. I hate to spoil this, but his ultimate relationship with Disiri is not that of someone who lords it over Disiri, but someone who it works the other way. He raises Disiri.
Yes, absolutely.
And so in that sense, yes, but also in the sense that in this world, everything is out of sorts, because the humans are the gods of the elf.
Yes.
And yet they sort of spend their time worshiping the elf. They spend their time worshiping dragons, which are even below the elf. And so the elf don't see them as objects of worship, and therefore Elfrist goes into total disarray. So everything is out of kilter, because everybody is worshiping or serving beings, we'll call them virtues and motivations that are beneath them. Whereas, so people aren't even worshiping the gods of sky. They're worshiping Elfrist, which is their lower natures. And if you think of all of these worlds as representative of basically higher natures that ascend as you rise, then you can say, well, okay, so he meets Disiri, he's in love with Disiri. Disiri causes him to strive to become better, but he's going to have to ascend above that. He's in Mythgarther. Actually, at some point, maybe it was Michael who said, if you want to descend to sky, well, you're going to have to understand what is the higher virtue than skill. And so he says, well, I'm not really, really sure to say what that is. Well, when you know, then you can ascend to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all about ascending to a higher level. So in that case, yeah, there's a lot of Christian concepts. There's a lot of Gnostic concepts, and that's been true really for Wolfe. It was certainly true in the Book of the New Sun. It's super true in the Book of the Long Sun.
Yeah.
There's a lot of concepts for. I'm kind of rather. If my name will ever be known, it'll be known as that guy who thinks that the key to Wolfe's works is Hamlet's Mill. And in Hamlet's Mill, the argument of the scholars was that all true myth is essentially a recognition of time passing, of the heavens moving in the sky. And in this story, you have each level looks up into their sky and they see the gods moving and progressing in their own sky. In Mythgarther, they look up at sky and they see, the Valfather and all those gods. In Elfrish, they look up and they see the humans, which is why I think time moves faster the higher you go, because you look up in the stars, you can see the story as the scholars of Hamlet's Mill explained. You can see the story of the Iliad, a 20-year battle progressing in a single night or a single year. And it's not always clear exactly how long, if you go down to a lower level, how long it will be, in the level above. It's not like there's, this much time has passed or that much time has passed. You can never really be sure how much time has passed when you return to the lower level or the higher level.
That's interesting.
They're not in total parity, but there's that concept as well. There are so many angles to look at it.
Because sorry to not jump on you there, but I sort of felt there was something with the worlds to like the mind a little bit, where like the most low is like the ego, the way the most low god, obviously that's in the next book, their interaction goes, and then you get up to Muspel and its dragons is kind of like lizard brain, which is a phrase people use, and then from there you've got your Aelfris is sort of a biological, and Kulili is also something that's very kind of hard and interesting to talk about, but I've often thought with her being sort of a worm being, there's also something to like, it made me think of white blood cells, and also your sort of like autonomic nervous system and sort of like biological, just like automatic processes to some degree. And then Mythgarther's like normal human functioning. And then obviously from Sky and on above, you get into spiritual or beyond physical
concepts of honor.
Yes.
Yes. An ultimate virtue.
Yeah, I don't know. So
right, exactly.
There was something.
And who knows what it is above that? I don't know.
Yeah, we don't really get it. Yeah, you do. There is some illusion that he goes to Kleos at some point, but obviously, nothing more than that, really.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, just thinking of this as a fantasy novel at that level, which really it works. Don't worry about all the themes. Just look at all the crazy stuff he does. Just the concept of the most low god, and that's something that he has. That is really kind of an amazing idea and concept. That beneath everything is this one fellow for which there are no worshipers. All he does is if he worships anything, he worships himself.
Yeah,
and that's an amazing concept. This has so many remarkable fantasy concepts, and I suppose you can find some of them in other places. You'll never find all of them in one place.
No, certainly not. No.
The book is also, it's very dreamlike, the way you kind of like, obviously with the time dilation, but there's chapters that are, obviously Abel has a lot of dreams as well, very vivid dreams, but then there's movements in certain chapters where things are like sequencing in a way that doesn't really make logical sense. But then you'll skip from moment to moment where like what's happening now and what's happening next. It's like they're totally disjointed the way you like pass through a room in a dream and then something else that totally different is happening, which again, I don't know. I mean, obviously with Wolf, it's intentional. I don't know what the point of it is because there also is a dream world that we get to it for a little bit. But
well, part of it for me was that semi disjointed nature of things and fairly dreamlike nature of things was, this is maybe a good time to talk about Sir Abel being one of Wolfe's unreliable narrators. But I love the difference and the contrast between his version of Unreliable versus Severian. Because Severian obviously has like an agenda with what he's writing, whereas it always felt to me with Sir Abel that if he's unreliable, it's not because he's purposefully not telling the truth. It's because he's either not remembering something or he's remembering it not the way that it actually happened, or he's just, like the reader, confused as to what happened. Especially I feel like in Night, when he's still in, you know, a 12-ish year old boy in a grown man's body. And so many years pass in the story, but they don't really pass for Abel in Night, not that extent of them. And so it's like he's got a child's memory of things that are happening and a child's understanding and ability to understand what's happening. And so that kind of was to me why some of the things had that sort of kind of Wonderland feel to them of not really him not grasping, not just us, the reader, the first time reader, second time reader, not fully grasping what's going on, but Abel himself not fully grasping what's happening to him.
Yeah, I think Wolfe has touched on this in that, you know, why do you always use these unreliable narrators? And that's because people are unreliable narrators. Severian has a perfect memory. Well, one of the most unreliable narrators that we have in our psyche is our memory, which is not perfect. But so Severian has these, and I don't think he really lies. I think he's biased. He's limited. He doesn't understand everything he sees. On a few occasions, he actually lies to himself, but I don't think he really lies to us. Now, Abel is another matter because Abel has had his memories extracted. And you know, that was one of the complaints when the Night first came out is, gosh, you know, Abel does seem to know suddenly a lot about archery. He seems to know a lot about fighting. You know, how is that the case? And Wolfe clarified, hey, look, he's been for many years in Aelfris. So he's been, you know, he doesn't remember any of the time, but my personal opinion is that, you know, that Desiri grows him up to full grown, you know, maybe 8 years in one single instance. And I suspect that's how long he's been running around in Aelfris, and she's just kind of kept him small. And then she says, "Oh, okay, I'll just let him grow."
Yeah, releases him.
Yeah,
right. I think that tracks too.
It's one of my favorite. We've talked about this a million times, but it still makes me laugh every single time. It's one of my favorite kind of running jokes through Night. Is every time Abel is having a hard moment and he's just trying to explain to whoever he's talking to, I'm like, man, I'm a kid. I'm still just a kid. And every time it's like, yeah, brother, I
know that. Yeah, I know what you mean, man.
Yeah, I was just a kid, and then I was with this woman and she made me a man. I was like, oh man, yeah, I've been there, brother. Yeah. It's like, it just tickles me every time.
That is something weird too about him growing up or just aging so fast in the world that actually moves like slower, you know? Like that seems so almost backwards to whatever we learn about the world as we go through the story, that every level is long. Like you can spend more time there and it's less time in the realm beneath it. But for him and growing up, somehow the series magic was just able to make him older. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Kind of
well, yeah, and actually, in the Wizard Knight Companion, there's actually a really, really detailed timeline, and I'm not convinced it really means anything because he includes time spent, from when Abel before in America, his grandparents, his parents, and I'm not sure there's any real relation between Abel and that time. So the time is how long has it been for in Mythgarther for how long as far as Abel's life? Well, I don't know. Maybe it was a very short time for them, and maybe it was a very long time for in Elfris, or maybe it's I guess it was a long time in Elfris. It could be centuries in Mythgarther.
Right.
Sure.
So we just don't know.
One thing that I caught on my reread that blew my mind, and this was like literally, this is before I even started rereading for, prepping for the show, but as soon as I finished Wizard the first time, I immediately went back to the first couple chapters of Night. And I guess this is a pretty Wolfian thing to do, but I was astonished at how much he spoils it in the first two chapters. Like it just
everything is foreshadowing.
Straight
right?
up explains what's going to happen, and it's physically impossible to get it until you've read it, and I think that's just masterful.
It was John Clute who said, he was the editor of the Science Fiction Encyclopedia, who said your first read of a Wolfe story is your second read, and for that reason it's impossible to spoil the books.
Yeah.
And I can, I get some pushback on this. Well, what about this scene? Are you sure you the reader should know about that in advance, where that won't spoil the story? Oh, well, maybe, but really no, because everything is context, and almost everything that anyone can tell you that's happening in this book is just one guy's opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so one other little thing for now about writing style. We're for our book club, we're starting a deep dive on King Arthur in literature, and we've been reading L'Amour d'Arthur is one of the first things that we've been reading, and I've been struck as we've been working through that, having read Wizard Knight, not just in the Arthurian side of Wizard Knight is pretty obvious, but there's a style that Gene Wolfe, the part of the way that he wrote it, feels very similar to me to reading something like L'Amour d'Arthur, especially in the section of Night where he's kind of going on his series of quests trying to get to be in the service of Duke Martyr, and then beyond as well. But just something in the way that he wrote it has that very kind of classical chivalric Arthurian feel to it, not just with the characters that are nods to Arthurian characters, but the way that he was writing it and the feel of those chapters.
Yeah, Wolfe said when when this book first came out that he wrote it because he wanted to just show knights. He wanted to show who they were, what their ideals were. It's all about knights. And he kind of did the same thing in a subsequent novel, Pirate Freedom, where it's all about pirates and what are they? What are pirates?
That's phenomenal, also.
So yeah, so he's basically this. If you ask, what is this novel about? Well, it's about knights and a lot of the concepts that you encounter in chivalric, but also Norse mythology, with giants, and he tries to rationalize things. How you have all of these stories about normal women who became wives to giants. My gosh, how do you even do that? How does Loki marry a giant woman and have children? And so yeah, it's he's just basically, if someone asks you, well, what is this? You sure have been reading this. What is it about? You can say, well, it turns out it's about knights.
It's about knights, which we needed more.
And about knight literature, not only like L'Amour d'Arthur, but definitely that, but the knight from Seven Lions. What is that? The pole?
Three Hearts and Three Lions.
3 Hearts, 3 Lions. Yeah. apparently we don't see him, but he's passed through here. So
right. That was he referenced the armor references that night, correct? When he's saying some people
exactly,
wanted me to paint this on his shield.
That's so
which
funny.
might explain the name of that plane that they live in, Mythgarther, which basically means where the stories are told.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, perhaps this is where all of the stories about knights are being told. So they're all going to walk through here one time or another.
Yeah, no, I remember I loved that little detail, because obviously it's very similar to Midgard from the Norse tales, but just the fact that myth is the beginning of it instead of just mid, it's myth.
Right.
Tells you kind of right away that
which means literally story. That's all it means.
This is a large story and kind of encompassing a lot of different stories.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think there's a moment where Abel hears voices on the wind, and it's a bunch of medieval like poets and storytellers too.
Yeah.
It's just a list of those and a few other knights, I think, too, which is just goes back into that too, where it's like maybe this is a place where just lots of stories are being told.
Yeah, which is very fun. And I think that's kind of one of the things that drew me to this duology here in the first place was feeling a very kindred spirit to Sir Abel, especially as a younger man. Imagining him kind of being steeped in some of these stories of Arthur and Robin Hood and these kind of knightly tales that then coupled with him meeting someone like Sir Ravd really like influences his idea of a knight and how he is going to behave come hell or high water. This is how a knight acts, and I'm going to do that.
Yeah. He is, other than Desiri, he is Abel's guide stone, his hero, right?
Did so when we reread this when I reread this for our group, I had just finished going through Long Sun and Short Sun again, and I found reading the rap scene, which also I forgot how little he's actually in the book because he feels so important. He's in like 3 chapters.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I found the way Ravd speaks to be very similar to how Silk talks in Long Sun. Did that come to you at all? And I it felt that way when I was reading it, and then I didn't know if it meant anything. But other than like obviously Silk is a very sort of righteous, does the right thing character, and Ravd emanates that same energy. But especially in the way he like questions Svan, it just reminded me so much of the way Silk talks in Long Sun. But I don't know, it may not mean anything.
In some ways, yes, but he's also, I think he's a little bit more. He's more of a person who doesn't take any nonsense.
That's fair.
Much more. Silk is much more tolerant than Ravd.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair.
Yeah.
There's some things that Ravd says I don't think Silk would say.
I agree. No, you're absolutely right about that.
I like the Arthurian comparisons of Ravd being the Sir Ector.
Oh, sure, yeah.
To Abel's wart. If we're speaking in T.H. White terms.
T.H. White, yeah.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, everyone ends up reading, or they get into this type of literature, they end up reading the Once and Future King, but you should really, really make a point of reading The Sword and the Stone, which is basically the Once and Future King is just basically a building out on Once and Future on the of The Sword and the Stone, and it's a lot more whimsical. It's a lot more. It's much more young adult than Once and Future King, and it's really just the first section of Once and Future King, and you should check it out. I had always assumed, what happened was Disney made the movie, so T.H. White, made this little novel based on it. But no, it's the Once and Future King. The Sword and the Stone came first.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. No, that I believe is on our list here in a couple of months. We'll be getting to those. We're super excited. But one one thing we talk about is Abel's we lovingly refer to them as Abel's Pokemon that he gathers as he goes on his journey. Do you have a favorite companion? Because he's got such a growing list throughout Night of these people that are drawn to him.
Yeah. Well, he's not an elf, but I do like Pook. I like Pook a lot.
I like your pronunciation. That was how I went for it as well.
So I like him a lot. The other ones are kind of interesting, although his ogre is his own special thing.
Yes.
I'm not going to say Manny because really Manny doesn't get really interesting until the second book.
Yeah.
But if you're going to ask me who my favorite is in the second book, it would be Manny, because every time Manny comes on the scene and starts talking, it's the whole thing comes alive.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I'm a sucker for dogs and stories. So once Gilf appeared,
Gilf is the best dog.
Absolutely in love, and I've been trying to convince my wife to let me get an Irish Wolfhound.
Well, he's not going to talk.
He's not going to talk, unfortunately. I'll pretend he does, and he probably won't turn into a giant something monster.
Yeah.
Thank your lucky stars if that's the case.
Yeah. Have you ever read Berserk, the manga?
No.
Because there's this monstrous side of Guts, the main character of that is drawn as this massive black wolf that it's started long before Wizard Knight was written, so I don't think there was any influence, but we were reading them at the same time, and that was where my mind went pretty immediately when Gilf transforms as this just massive, long-fanged.
Well, I mean, Gilf is great. Yeah, he's like the perfect dog, and I should say, Gene Wolfe had a particular gift for writing animal characters. I mean, you've read Long Sun, so I remember like the Crest Cat or sure. But really, I think his best job was in a novella that he wrote probably about the same time as this, maybe a little bit earlier, called The Sailor Who Sailed After the Sun, where this kid joins a ship. He wants to get away. He joins the ship, and he discovers he doesn't like it, and he ends up on this little tropical island where they're getting new supplies. And he sneaks off because he doesn't want to do any work. And he runs into this monkey who's got a stack of coconuts. And the monkey doesn't talk, but you can tell that you can imagine the way he is with the boy, that he's actually coming forward with all of these. You wouldn't need, in your mind, you don't need anyone to say, well, he does this or this in order to say these words. But in the text, though, he is written as though that's what he's saying. So he's like, taps on the coconuts and says, I will give you all of these for your knife. And then by the end of their negotiation, he bargains for all of his clothes and his knife and leaves the kid naked on the island and goes and joins the ship. And everyone knows he's a monkey, but he's such a good worker. No one makes a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What was it? What was the name of that novella again?
The Sailor Who Sailed After the Sun.
Incredible.
You can get it in the Innocents Aboard.
Okay. Very cool
collection.
I skipping ahead to a different type of character here. Something that I've been kind of chewing on, and I don't know if this applies directly in Night, but kind of looking at Night and Wizard together as one piece. Do you feel like Garseg / Setter is the main antagonist of this book? Because I was trying to think of who is the antagonist, because it's not as direct as some stories.
Well, obviously, Gringarm is like the ultimate boss
for
right?
sure. Yeah,
he's not going. In the first book, Garsich is Abel's friend.
Right.
He's his mentor in some ways. He's a very benign and beneficial character. It's only later that we discover that he has really a darker side to him that we're unaware of, and it leads to a lot of turns in the novel. But Wolfe was always very generous with his villains. I remember once he said in a panel, he says, "Look, a good villain is someone who could almost be a hero,
Sure,
but
yeah.
fails at it."
Nice, yes.
And so when you think of it that way, you begin to see, okay, you kind of tabulate all of his villains in the past, and you realize that we barely get to see Typhon in the Book of the New Sun, but when he's elaborated in the Book of Long Sun, you say, well, he has some good sides actually on his as well. Blood is another villain who you say, well, he's got a deeper story in him, and maybe morally he wouldn't be worse than Hawk. And so you go through in An Evil Guest. I think I know who the villain is, but I'm not really sure how, because he's also kind of he has a relationship with the main character that's much like Garcich. So it's that to say, is he the villain? Yeah, I think Garcich is like the villain of the two novels, but he's not in the night. In the night, he's a friend.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like I remember on the first read through it feeling like he was using Sir Abel, but that's kind of everybody is trying to use Sir Abel, and that doesn't necessarily make any of the other ones an antagonist towards Sir
and
Abel.
he makes him a more powerful knight, a more powerful being. By basically just teaching him who he is. And so in that case, he's very important to Abel's growth, and he's just another person though that Abel has to grow out of in order to to reach his final arc,
which is kind of a story of growing up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a friend who you said, he's he means so much to me, and I think about all the times together, but I realize now looking back, he wasn't a great influence on me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. There's a lot of those for sure.
A lot of Garcich.
Yeah, but and in your younger days, they did help you level up, though. Yeah, no,
exactly. Yeah, maybe you wouldn't be the person you are today. You didn't know that
for sure.
That's funny. I know we've kind of got off this topic of Pook, but also right after the Mountain of Fire scene comes right after the introduction of Garcich. And one of the funniest, saddest things in the whole book, I think, is after they've gotten Pook out of the Mountain of Fire, and he's got both of his legs broken and an arm broken, and they get up there, and then Thunrolf turns to him and says, "I'll never throw you in that mountain again." And Pook just says, "Thank you, sir. Thank you." it just made me cackle. It's just like,
that is so Pook.
I know, he's just like genuinely seems so happy. He was like, "Yeah, please don't ever do that again." Oh my gosh. But that's one of my favorite scenes in either novel. I found the language used as both he gets thrown and then he goes down was so evocative. It was like occasionally in reading, and Gene Wolfe does this more than authors, like you kind of forget that you're reading, and you're just like totally transported. I love that sequence. It's also very heartbreaking and very, very awful. But
and in another time, in another era, if Wolfe had read, say he had written this in the early 70s or in the 60s, this would be like 20 little paperbacks. That's how they did it.
Sure.
It has so many. Oh, wait, we're wrapping that. Wait a minute. This is the end of another story. We're starting something else. What is this?
Because there are lots of little vignettes. That's
kind of what that was. That's one of the main things that made me think of it. And as we're reading more to Arthur, is those little kind of vignettes.
Exactly.
Same. All part of a grander thing. Obviously, with more of a through story for Wizard Knight.
Yeah.
And kind of a leveling up each time. There is a progression for Sir Abel. He's learning things about being a knight, and also sometimes literally learning skills as he's progressing. I remember the first read through thinking like, Abel, come on, man, you just like, why are you continuing here? Like he's literally offering to make you his son. You could have like land and everything, and I love that. That's one of the things though that I love about Abel is that he's so, nope, I'm going to be a knight. I'm not here to be your son. I'm a knight, and I'm specifically fulfilling. I want to fulfill Rav's legacy, and I'm going to serve Duke Martyr, and you're not going to tempt me off the path with, being adopted and becoming your heir and all of this. His dedication is admirable, and not something that most characters would do, I don't think.
Well, and it's the same thing when when he's fighting, or when he thinks he has to fight Setter at the bottom of the Mountain of Fire. Thunderolf drops his sword, and then he starts saying and I don't even want to write this. I'm embarrassed to even say that I thought, but he doesn't even pick the sword up, but he says, I wanted to pick the sword up. And he's just embarrassed that he even wanted to, because for some reason he's decided, because he has to get a turn, he can't have any other sword.
Yeah.
Which is the most little kid version.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's
it's such a
afraid. Yeah. He's afraid that if he gets a sword,
yes,
that Desiri won't give him a sword.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, right.
Which, it's a very childlike understanding of what that means.
It really is good, because I remember thinking dumb stuff like that when I was
100%.
12 years old.
100%.
If I do this,
especially when it comes to girls.
Yes.
Getting a girl to like you.
Yes.
You'll believe the really dumb, this silly, very arbitrary thing. You'll very much believe, no, I literally cannot have a sword. I can't even touch a sword.
Well, also, but it's a very I'm not sure how to describe. I'm not sure there is a word for it, but you've decided that what you want in life, what it is you want in life, and you're not willing to compromise or leave yourself an opening to have less than what that is. And most people don't ever have that clear of a vision of what they want to be, so that they are afraid of being sucked into doing something else, because they may never get around to the thing that they really know they want to do with their lives. And Abel is like that. Abel has a very clear vision of what he wants to be, and in fact, he has to reinterpret what that is when he starts. He wants to be a knight. When he thinks of a knight, he thinks of okay, well, he's going to have a lot of armor, and he's going to work for a duke or something, and he's going to hold out at a river and joust. And it's only, and part of the arc of this story is that he's learns that a knight is something much more involved in that, and can come in different forms. He's going to say as Tu decides he's not going to be a knight, he's going to be a farmer, and Abel says no, he doesn't know it, but he's already a knight.
Yeah.
There's nothing magic about the sword that taps on your shoulder.
Yeah.
When it kind of going along those lines, it struck me, this reread of how as his idea of what a knight, his knowledge of what a knight actually is kind of shifting and changing and evolving and growing. He starts kind of remembering different things that Sir Ravd told him. Where,
even though, how long had he been with Sir Ravd, to be
right,
a few days,
a couple days at the most.
Crazy.
But at first it's all honor, and then the last few pages when he's getting into these kind of serious fights, whether it's with the Angerborn or getting ready to go and confront Grengarm, it's about a knight doesn't count his enemies, he does what he has to do.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's a much more practical and less romantic ideal of what it is to be a knight. And I love that it's those are both things that the same character told him in the same little couple of chapters that we got to know him, but Abel is processing it and remembering things differently as he is growing, which is brilliant.
Exactly.
That's how life works.
And it sounds all very fantasy masculine, but you should remember, reading this, that Gene Wolfe served in the Korean War. At the worst of the fighting. He faced real combat. He came back terribly scarred with PTSD. He knows what it is to fight and what it means to be a fighter. He's not just making this up. What would these people say. To some extent, he's doing that as well, because that's all in those stories of the knights. But it's also coming from someone who knows what he's talking about.
This is maybe reaching a little bit. One of my favorite book series of all time is The Black Company by Glenn Cook. And he's pretty upfront about having based all of the characters in The Black Company off of men that he served with. Do you know, did Wolfe do anything like that with any of these?
I will tell you
knightly
that the
characters?
only character in the book that I know for a fact was based on a real person is Sir Mark, who is based on, there's no reason for him to lie about this, by Mark Aramini. And
Nice.
and I don't know if you remember, Sir Mark comes up in the second volume, and he's a guy who is just always ready to respond to any insult or challenge. Because they're supposed to hold off against the enemy, and one of them issues a challenge to him, and he ends up charging at them and having this whole flank charge all together, and it causes a terrible mess. And that's basically Mark on the Earth list in the early part of the 2000s.
That's incredible.
And that's really kind of the way he was on the Earth list in a lot of ways. He had to answer every fight. He had to answer every disagreement. And in some ways, at the time, I think he's all through this now, but at the time, I felt like it really kind of scarred him, like he was being picked on and beat up. But he kind of, looked at it another direction. Well, you kind of your attitude makes him want to do that. And in some ways, he hasn't changed in that way. And but
he's still a knight, though. Like, that's cool.
Yeah, he said that's it. You're in a Wolfe novel. Why complain about that? So
I know, right?
You've been knighted by.
Well, what's kind of interesting though too is that Sir Abel exhibits a lot of those traits for especially the first half, you could say, of Knight. I think because he's so driven by that.
I am a knight. If I'm going to be treated as a knight, then if I'm going to call myself a knight, then I have to insist on being treated as a knight.
Yeah.
And therefore, he gets. Of course, I mean the captain. He wasn't going to win over the captain of the ship.
No, he wasn't. So, and I think I can see the argument. I can for Abel being a little bit of a bully in that situation, but I think that the captain is one of those types that was going to walk all over.
Captain is also a bully and a thief, and 100%. He's dangerous,
and he proves that.
Right, exactly.
Story goes on.
I mean, the attitude of the sailors toward Abel versus the captain clarifies everything.
Well, and the attitude of all of the crew post the captain when Abel shows back up.
Right, because he is a knight. He serves exactly the role of what you would want a knight on a ship. His only failing was he didn't have a pinion flying from the ship, from the peak sail of the ship to alert the pirates and the cannibals whose names escape me at the moment, but
the Austerlings,
and so that they would stay away. Hey, we've got a knight on here. But he goes to the front of the fight, which is this is a very interesting little bit about a Wolfe novel, is that as soon as the action gets hot and heavy, Wolfe just cuts to another.
Not going to talk about it. It happened. We're not going to go into it.
You know what I'm talking about.
very Tolkien. Very Tolkien. Tolkien cuts away from the action a lot. Yeah.
Like Arthur too.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny how there seemed to be an emphasis on grammar, like grammatical corrections throughout it. May, it's whom. Like, that was also just came along with being a knight, is you just like had a master's in English or something. Yeah.
Well, because he heard Rav make that correction.
Yeah. But then he did it to everyone. Okay. Yeah. He almost did it to Cloud. Yes. Like, he was doing it to everyone.
This is being a knight, is making you must speak properly.
Yeah. And also his takes on people too. Like, the way he explains Cloud, I think, is one of my favorite descriptions ever. She's like a woman, but kind of not like a woman too.
With that's actually part of Mark Aramini's theory about the book, that his name Abel versus may or can.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that maybe that has something more integral to do with his nature. Yeah, maybe so.
Interesting. I'm Abel.
Right. And note again, his name is Abel, as in I am able to do this. He's not Abel as in Cain and Abel.
Right.
But
Correct. Yes.
but once again, you have to think about that whole
play on words
concept of Abel by when someone is named that and has so many twins and brothers.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. In fact, with that kind of angle of the brother thing, what's the name of that blog that we were reading?
Cumberbatch something another.
Yeah, something.
I should have that name.
Anyway, one thing that this guy we'll put a link to this blog in the show notes because we spent a lot of time reading this and it's fascinating. But
the Duchy of Cumberbatch.
Yes, Duchy of Cumberbatch. One thing that he was positing, getting something, some feedback.
That might have been me.
One thing he was positing that I thought was kind of interesting. I don't know, because I feel like I'm more in the camp of the fairy swapping of the kids, of Abel and Art. But there was an interesting theory that he was positing because of that. There's that one dream in Night where Abel feels like he's drowning. He's experiencing somebody drowning and being pulled down, like trying to save someone and being pulled down and drowning. And this theory was saying that that was actually the true Abel being drowned at Griffin's Ford while trying to rescue Bertold, and that Abel is actually dead, and Earth Abel was then brought back and to fulfill that role, and was maybe potentially later put into the original Abel's body by Desiri, and it wasn't literally her like physically changing him, but putting him into a different form. I don't know if I buy it.
I don't have the problem is I don't have a better theory, so I can't just say that's ridiculous. Yeah. Maybe it is true. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I like I said, the one that clicks with me most is that the swapping.
I believe. I'm gonna tell you, they're both Mark and Michael's theories. I think that when we understand it, they're going to be both true somehow.
Yeah, that actually tracks. Because one credit to the changeling theory, and I do agree with you where Wolfe finds ways to make both things true, is Abel's American name or original name was Arthur Ormsby. So you find he's an Arthur.
There's your big spoiler right there.
Yeah, my bad. But he titles a chapter "The Broken Sword," which is Paul Anderson's novel from 1954, which is a changeling story that also involves Norse gods, and the changeling boy is the son of Orm the Strong. And so Ormsby sort of basically means son of Orm. So I think Wolfe is trying to make. I think it's an illusion. I think it's definitely an illusion. That Abel is Arthur, but he's also Skaflock or Valgard.
And you have the Valfather showing up in that.
Well, he's
too, at the end.
Well, he's Arthur. He's Arthur Ormsby, which is to say Wormsby. He's the son of the dragon.
That too.
Arthur Pendragon.
Yes.
So but in what way is he Arthur? We're kind of enticed to see Arthur as Arnie, as this is our Arthur type. But he's,
and there's a lot of,
not, is he? But even though he does have a sister who's so close to Morrigan Le Fay, and I mean, there's just so many things about it. So in what sense is Art Ormsby is he actually Arthur? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, because that's a big part of the Arthur story too, right? Is the rebirth that is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that Arthur is dead and is someday going to come back. And
Yeah.
The interesting thing though is
Back to
Arthur.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
Arthur's Abel is very Lancelot though,
Yeah.
as the sort of champion. He also like is
Yeah.
we've got Arthur, and again now we're talking wizard, but Gaynor tries to have a relationship with Abel as well, as does Morcaine. So there's like there's there. It's interesting how he's playing. He seems to sort of be playing both parts as Lancelot and Arthur. Or I feel like Wolfe is wanting us to think about both of those things as someone being both of those at the same time in some capacity. I don't know.
But try and put it together.
Well, I know. Yeah, I need to do more than that. Because also Abel ends up being the wizard. So is on some level Abel also Merlin? It's like, is he?
Of course he is.
He's all of them. Like, yeah.
He doesn't end up stuck in a tree, but
no, he doesn't.
Yeah.
That's so
but I don't know. I'm not sure. He is kind of inhabiting all of the good knights.
Yes.
Except for Tug, who seems to be the who is it? The one who went around with a pot on his head.
Yeah.
Percival. Is he Percival?
So, and don't worry about the spoiling of the wizard, because I have so much more to talk about. The wizard is so dense.
It is
very dense.
Worry
Yeah.
that you're going to tap all.
No.
There's a lot of the it's a lot of it's more Night feels more coming of age in a lot of ways to me. And so there's a lot of that kind of there's a lot, not to take away from them or to say that they're not important to the grand story, but there's a lot of kind of just like the progression of different quests where Abel is leveling up, if you will.
But it's not, we talk about the Art and Abel as twins, and Ben and Bold Bertold as twins. There's a sense in which Tug and Abel are also twins. Tug gets taken down to Elfris and stays for a long time.
It's like a protege.
He
almost.
comes back to be a knight, and there's also a baby that is handed to right. And so when I read that, and I don't know whether that's actually true, but it made me think of Osiris, who is also handed off as has infant stories, and is Wolfe has pinged on that particular myth before. He's part of a whole resurrection myth. There's all kinds of Wolfian elements to it. On the other hand,
we're still here.
They have nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I also, you talk about twins. I still don't know what to think about it, but it's so interesting that there's Desiri and Desira.
Yes.
Which are both twins. And then Abel sort of plays her husband for a while, which is also.
Yeah.
Here's
one thing I will say about that is that, yes, supposedly Desira is named for Desiri, but Desira is Desiri's god, and which isn't really made understood until much later. So and times are not the same in this between worlds. We think of, okay, one moves slowly and the other moves faster. Yes, but they're not exactly in sync either.
No.
So it's entirely possible that Desiri herself is named for Desira. When Abel meets Michael, the angel, he leaves them and he talks to him and gives him advice about what he's going to have to do in his life and all that. He says, well, okay, I've got to go down to Elfris to find that noble knight, Abel of the High Heart.
Right.
Which that does pay off by the end of The Wizard, too.
It does. So, I've not thought about Desira being, of course she is, Desiri's god.
But that's kind of one of the whole things about that area specifically, is they're kind of that's kind of a hotspot of that reversal of the roles,
right. They're
as far as the worship goes.
Worshiping the elf. The elf are allowing themselves to be worshipped by the people. The elf are worshiping dragons or serving dragons. Everything is turned upside down.
That's so interesting. Yeah. It is clearly kind of the purpose of the book for Abel. Obviously, I think Wolfe is doing some more. I don't really feel like I totally know what it is, but Abel does seem, through non-heavy-handed measures, to restore the proper balance of things, or at least is a vessel for doing that.
And we don't want to, and it is a spoiler to say what it is, but that is his goal. That's why he was abducted by the elf. That's why he was trained and raised. That's why he was suddenly, released.
Yes. Well, and and interesting one too. That's one. I do love the moment in the wizard and we'll talk more about that later. But it's when he kind of gives his like speech that he doesn't even know what he's going to say.
Right.
He just knows he has to get in the same room as Arthur.
Yep. Just
very interesting.
His Manchurian candidate moment.
Basically, yeah.
That's one thing that I find interesting, and if I'm forgetting a connection in Wizard that explains this, then stop me and we'll talk about this on the next episode. But it almost from the perspective of Night of this book, it seems fairly random that Abel art was selected. Do you have any theories as to why he was chosen? Was it just right place at right time? They needed someone for this message, or is there something that was immediately special about this kid that made Desiri and the other elf think, hey, this is our guy?
I couldn't say. It looks random. It may. Anything I could say would be the wildest of speculation, which I don't have a problem with.
Yeah, I don't have all about wild speculation.
But what could there be? It could be. A lot of times you find that something that looks random, or that something that looks like, oh, it's way too contrived, is really just a random natural occurrence in the plot once you understand the plot more fully. For in a Wolfe story, he's always had an interest in a strange interplay of cause and effect. His first science fiction story that he sold was Mountains Like Mike's, which looks at that. It's a very similar. It sounds like it could be an allusion to this particular novel.
Yeah.
But the protagonist begins to speculate over how he ended up in this position and the strange interplay of cause and effect. And I'm not even sure what Wolfe was going for there, but I know that, based on all of his writings after that he had a real interest in toying with that concept of cause and effect. What happens if the cause affects the effect that caused it? I guess it was
a kind of a pretty straightforward interpretation from that aspect of the hero's journey, where it isn't necessarily always a like magical chosen one kind of thing. Like sometimes it's just the person that is in that place at that time to be that hero, and they either rise to it or they don't. And that story is ideally them rising to that occasion and fulfilling that role.
Yeah, but he has an interesting connection to not just the history of this world, but also to the nature of this world. He ends up in a fight or a struggle, and he can feel the sea rising within him. It's as though he gains power from the space between Elfris and Mythgarther itself, or the space between Elfris and Niflheim itself. I'm not sure but from the sea itself.
Well, and you could, especially if you go along with the theory saying that, we have the kind of fairy swap of these two boys, there does seem to be something, whether they realized it at the time or not, that is kind of inherently heroic about these twins across worlds, because there is that theory that some of those, flashbacks / dreams that Abel is seeing of being in a firefight and plane being, saving a hijacked plane and all these things, in theory being the other Abel on Earth. So
doing all of these heroic deeds and
yes,
being,
yeah. So whether they realized it or not, they did kind of end up swapping these two heroic mirror images of each other.
But why did they need to do that? Why, if Abel was so great, why didn't they just use him? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I think Wolfe knew. Which is the frustrating part about a Wolfe story, is that you don't really necessarily know what Wolfe is occluding, but he's occluding something. He's hiding something from me.
Well, and it does seem too kind of like maybe the elf didn't do the swapping. Maybe the boys accidentally did it themselves, because the book starts out with Abel describing being at the cabin with Ben, going off to collect sticks, and then kind of going downhill and it getting dark, and he's jumped by people that are asking, who comes to Elfrise.
Right, exactly.
Is an odd thing to say if you're, purposefully bringing someone to Elfrise.
Exactly. Yeah. It feels. This was a complaint I remember when the novel first came out, is that Wolfe's protagonists have this sense that they will rise. They will rise because they will rise. And there's that sense about Severian in the Book of the New Sun. There's that sense about it for Silk in the Book of the Long Sun. Latro is kind of like that, but not really. He's got other things going on. There's Encanto in the Book of the Short Sun. It's just you have these guys who, for instance, once again, spoiling Wizard, he gets thrown into a dungeon, and next thing you know, before you know it, he's the king of the dungeon, and and he's just like that. And so how much of that is how much of the world is simply Abel himself? That's a question, and maybe that's why he's special.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's why he was swapped out, if to the extent that you would say that he was swapped out. It's hard to say. Unless you know what is going on, then it's hard to answer some of these questions. At some point you read these stories enough, and very often your mind just makes this leap, and you're suddenly like Abel in a brand new world where everything works and everything fits together, and you say, I understand. And that is kind of what I'm looking for in this story, and that I look at this and it's secluded. It's an amazing fantasy story. It doesn't matter if you ever figure it out. You're never going to read another fantasy story like this, but still you get the sense something else is going on, and you say, well, why, Wolfe, just spill it, and he's not going to do it, and there you are, you're just stuck.
Yeah, it's interesting with you talking about that, where like I'm very curious as to Wolfe spilling the beans on Garsick and being setter, like, because normally I feel like Wolfe would have hid something like that and let you figure it out way later, like, oh wait, that's the same guy. But he says it obviously in the character list. It's in the character list, so if you've read that, that's revealed right away, which that's fine.
And and in the first book, that gets revealed. He goes down,
but
sees Setter his face poking out
of the dragon. Yeah. Yeah.
But Abel kind of figures it out.
Garsich's face sticking out of the mouth.
Yeah, and that's kind of confirmation though, because Abel kind of is figuring it out, in the Tower of Glass, if I'm remembering.
Yeah, and
correctly.
you have to wonder, he has to make a promise to Garsick, and as he moves along, he's kind of in a spot, and that's that's really an important part of the arc, is that he's honor bound to keep this promise that Garsick had him make, and yet he doesn't believe that doing that is honorable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And finds a very kind of rules lawyers his way out of it there too, as we'll get to next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is a great point. But I think it's kind of imperative to the story that that I guess that's the argument that I'd make, is that it's fairly important for that connection to be made soonish in this story to understand that Garsage and Setter are one and the same.
Yeah.
As opposed to keeping it secret, keeping it safe.
Sure.
And he is Abel's mentor and his friend, and he's also a terrible, terrible tyrant.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of I don't want to say humanizes, but it certainly gives us a different perspective on there's a little bit of extra of trust there that gets built that makes Garsage a more likable character, because
he's
he is being honest with Abel about this part of him. Like, he's being honest, like, yes, I am Setter. Like, he's not trying to keep it a secret once Abel figures it out. And I think that perhaps that also in Night especially gives us, the audience, the reader, a reason to like him more.
Yeah.
That makes it more complicated as we start learning more things about who this Setter guy actually is and what he's trying to accomplish.
And here's something. This is while we're talking about Garsage. This is just an amazing bit of world building. Once again, you have these layers. Elfres, you have Niflheim where the dragons are. You have Elfres where the elf are. You have Mythgarther where men are. You have Sky where essentially the Woden and Thor and all the Norse gods.
Yeah, all the Aesir are up there.
Exactly. But so Garsage gets all of the elf to build a tower in Elfres, and it builds it up, because their sky is the ocean in Mythgarther, and so when he gets to the top of the tower is finished, and you go to the top, that becomes the Isle of Glass in Mythgarther, which is very important to the story, and also whatever the answer is to this novel, it is an important place to the key of what that answer is.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but yes. When it could,
but we know it's there.
It's there somewhere.
Yeah, there's a meaning somewhere.
When it makes
I remember something that that Michael Swanwick said about Wolfe's novella's tracking song. He says, well, the answer to that whole novella is right there at the end. And if we were as smart as Gene Wolfe, we could figure it out.
Well, there you go. That's our problem. That's why this isn't coming together.
Once you fit, discovering the answer to your problem is just halfway there, right?
Yep. It does make me wonder if and this I don't think is addressed. I'm not remembering it if it is, but is it's an interesting idea. Was the Isle of Glass was that the goal of this tower, was just getting this tower up into Mythgarther?
I think it's kind of presumably like a Tower of Babel thing where they're
right. Well, that's kind of what I wonder is the goal with eventually maybe conquering at least parts of Mythgarther to continue building that tower.
His goal is to go on and conquer the next step, because and I guess maybe it has something to do with the inability to rise far beyond where you started.
Mm-hmm.
So you can you're born in Niflheim as he was, and so he can rise to Elfres, but getting onto Mythgarther is another matter. So maybe he builds this tower and the Isle of Glass in order to come out to Mythgarther. I don't know if it worked or why wasn't he there or what his plans were. I need to read this novel, 7 more times.
Right. Well, it makes me wonder. Toward at the end when Sir Abel rescues Morsane from the being sacrificed to Grengarm, she mentions that if Grengarm had eaten her, he would be as real in Mythgarther as
they were.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And during the day and everything. Yeah.
And Abel mentions how Garsich is like you can tell that he's less real in Aelfrice, and he's even less so when he saw him in Mythgarther. And so I'm curious if it was something special about Morsane because of her parentage that would have
well, she's from, I guess, yeah, her parents are dragons, her and humans. So
right.
So I think she's more human than dragon.
But I'm just wondering,
who knows? We don't know what's under those clothes.
No.
Yeah, I mean, Arthur, they burn his body, and there's a sense that there's a reason for it when he's, after he dies.
That's a really good point because it got me thinking, like, Grengarm and Garsich, we know were allies at one point, but don't really seem to be anymore, and they probably are both trying to accomplish the same goals for themselves.
Yeah, maybe adversaries
and so on this last reread, I was just wondering, like, why isn't Garsich trying to consume someone that would enable him to just be real?
Well, maybe that was the point. That's why the body that they find on the Isle of Glass, who apparently took poison, maybe that's what she was preventing.
Fascinating. And then my question is there too is like, again, is like, what makes these people special that would cause that? Because we know that the Osterlings were throwing bodies down as sacrifices in the Mountain of Fire. And presumably those were already dead, or is it this connection, which is doubly interesting then, because it gives more of a dragon connection to Abel too, if that's the key, if it's like half human half dragon is the thing that has to be consumed for a dragon to be real in Mythgarther. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense.
No, you would think, but the problem with that is that you would think that with all these Osterlings throwing things down, the dragons would have worked out that problem. And
sure,
if that was a solution.
Yeah, if it was just eating people. Or maybe if they had to be alive and they're throwing, by the time they reach the bottom, they're dead.
By the time they get them, they're dead. Yeah.
So do we all agree that are the Osterlings people that have lost their humanity or kind of devolved?
Yeah.
That's basically the idea. They're not something.
Yeah, they're just people. Yeah, they're just people.
But they have to eat people to be more human again or something like that. I don't know.
I think that they're just cannibals. I think
maybe just cannibals.
It just tastes good. Yeah.
I don't know that. I mean, maybe they have a cultural belief behind part of that.
Yeah.
But
we're dragons and we eat people. So
which that's an interesting.
I mean, we think about all the characters. The danger about all this discussion is that people will hear us talk and they say, "Oh, this sounds like the Book of Revelation or something like that." This is like the most amazing, intricate fantasy story you've ever read, and from just out of the corner of your eye, while you're reading all these crazy fantasy story things, is a whole story, is a whole narrative is there, but is just beyond your ability to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And so that, which is why it inspires all of these discussions. But at its ground level, it's just a fantasy narrative. It's a portal fantasy. There's a young kid. He lives in America someplace. Sounds like it's like Southern Illinois or Northern Missouri or something like that. And so he walks in. He ends up in taken by elves, and next thing you know, he's got all of this other stuff going on. And no one understands what he's talking about when he says he's just a boy from America. He's transformed. He's been transformed into in some sense, it is kind of a wish fulfillment because you have a boy who suddenly turned into a strapping young man. So there's that. But once again, it's a fantasy story. What do you want? And so it's got ogres, it's got giants, it's got children of giants, it's got gods, it's got frost giants who we don't actually get to see, but we realize are bigger versions of the giants that we are already seeing.
We do get one. We get one.
Yeah,
we get one near the end. Yeah, right before the dragon fight.
So it just goes. It's a bonkers fantasy story, but that you, for some reason, you can't stop talking about once you've read it.
Truly.
It is very pleasurable to read, and I find Wolfe very pleasurable to read, but obviously there's lots of Book of the New Sun that is just bewildering when you're reading it, and it's still enjoyable, but like you said, there's a lot of it especially the first time through, you just kind of have to power through, where I do feel like the first two chapters, first maybe two or three of Wizard or the Knight, I mean, you're kind of like, okay, not a lot's happening, but there's like a boy and something strange, and then the second he meets Ravd, it's like you're very hooked with just like you said, fantasy candy. And then from there, it just goes on and on and on, where it's exactly like you said. It's a very pleasurable, enjoyable story with just sort of insane pacing where, like you said, there's clearly something going on in the background that you just kind of don't have the bandwidth to really receive without piecing everything together. But yeah, it's pretty riveting, breakneck. It's maybe one of the more, for me, it's probably the most pleasurable thing I've read of Gene Wolfe's.
I was like your friend where I had a copy of the Shadow and Claw, so the first two books in Book of the New Sun. I'd had it for a while, and I'd picked it up and started to read it several times, and was not in a place to follow along what was happening. And I had I love video games also. All three of us do. And I had a very similar realization with reading Gene Wolfe that I did with playing Dark Souls-like games from Software, where it's like, those games are completely counter to my normal play style. And I would get so frustrated with dying all the time and, just getting wrecked because of how I was used to playing video games. And when I finally just took a step back and said, I'm just going to embrace this new style of gameplay. I'm going to embrace dying all the time. I'm going to embrace learning, and I'm going to embrace not knowing what's going on. And then I started having just the absolute best time with them. And that was kind of my thing with reading Gene Wolfe, was once we really got into Book of the New Sun and then continuing on to Wizard Knight, I now, with starting a new Gene Wolfe book, I just kind of totally let go of that need to know what's going on. And I know
because you're not going to know.
You're not going to know.
You're not going to figure out where it's going next
at all.
I'll have to figure out what it all means.
I'll have some semblance of an idea of what just happened when I get to the very end.
That's enough.
That's what the reread is for. That's when I can understand what's going on. And that just that blew the doors off for me, and I adore it. It reminds me, there was that Scorsese film, damn it, Shutter Island. And I remember being blown away watching that movie for the first time, and the twist at the end that completely changes your entire perspective on the film, and then going back and rewatching it pretty much immediately and having a completely different experience watching the film the second time. The only thing I'll say is that only lasts for those two viewings. And one thing I find that's beautiful about Gene Wolfe's work is, like, you get to keep having that experience every single time that you read.
Yeah, it is a problem with Wolfe, is in that people don't understand that what he's doing is he's giving you an entirely new way to read genre fiction. And one thing I didn't tell you about my first reading of the Book of the New Sun, my friend said, "So what'd you think?" And I said, "Well, I think that Wolfe is an amazing creator of worlds, but a so-so writer." And because all of those little idiosyncrasies about Wolfe that can be frustrating, like a fight starts and you don't, before you've realized that it started, it's already over.
Yeah.
And just all these little things, I just saw, I saw those as weaknesses. I didn't realize that was part of the plan. And it wasn't until I read but I was intrigued enough that I read the fifth of Cerberus. And when I did that, I saw everything fell into place. I recontextualized the Book of the New Sun, and I began telling people, let me tell you about this guy, Gene Wolfe, who is the greatest science fiction writer, period. Agreed. And you have to take it on another way. I think Michael Andre Druisi said you have to read, slow down and not skim, but you don't want to read too slow, because then you'll get lost and you'll forget where you are. And it's a little bit of a knack to learn to read book, but once you do, it's kind of hard to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had it's doing a book club where we're reading not just Wolfe, but lots of different things. We found that the thing we read after whatever we read after reading a Wolfe book, there's an adjustment period to be like, wait,
truly.
Oh yeah, we're back in regular time now.
Well, this is a normal book.
I've left Alfred. I'm back in Mythgarther. Okay.
Yeah,
100%.
So funny. Oh yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Well, this has been an absolutely phenomenal discussion.
Yes, thank you so much.
Do we have any last kind of thoughts on Night? I can't wait to really delve into Wizard on our next discussion, but any closing thoughts on Night?
No, because it's just one more. Here's one thing: Night is not always people. A lot of people say that they like Night a lot better than the Wizard, which is, it's interesting that you have a novel called The Wizard Knight, where the first volume is the Knight and the second one is the Wizard. That's the first thing you have to kind of get past. But the other is, a lot of people say, I'm not so crazy about that Wizard. But the truth is, Wizard is you want to talk about strange pacing. It's got all this weird pacing, because you get halfway into the book and you've reached the end of like this major arc. And then you find, I've still got half the book to go here. And he's got like 4 more arcs to go in this book.
Mm-hmm.
So
you
just got to brace yourself for the next volume, because you think that, okay, well, he's got nothing to do but wrap things up for this after we've gone through this ride of the night. And no, he's got places to go. He's just setting you up to get there.
Yeah.
It's also, and again, this is in the Wizard, but it starts with, Abel's back, or he's not back right away, but then he's back, and then I'm not going to tell you anything that happened at all. Like, cool.
So, okay, I know all of you all want my stories about where I've been. I'm not telling you any of that. And just read all of the Arthurian literature, and then you'll get an idea.
Know what I did. Yep. Go read all the Arthurian literature. Go read all the Norse
mythology.
You read all the Norse mythology, then you know what I did.
You got it. Phenomenal. All right. Well, thank you so much, James. Everybody go listen to the Rereading Wolfe podcast, and thank you so much.
But only if you've read. This is the problem we have with the Rereading Wolfe podcast. Listen, if we don't spoil all 4 of the tetralogy of the Book of the New Sun and Earth of the New Sun, every single episode, we are not doing our jobs. It was an oversight.
Yes.
So, it's kind of hard to get listeners to a podcast where we say, okay, you want to listen to a podcast? Great. Here's 5 books for you, novels for you to read.
Yep. Read these, then come listen.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait already for our next discussion here in a couple weeks. We talk about, by the time you're listening to this, it won't be a couple weeks, but talk about Wizard and finish up this discussion of this book that absolutely means the world to us. And so thank you so much for joining us, James. It's been a phenomenal conversation.
Sir.
We loved having you.
Yes.
And look forward to the next one.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks.